Before we get into what's setting Elon apart, aside from his high intellect, because there's a lot of people out there that have really high intellect that are not that successful. And so we're going to really look at what's really creating someone who's successful versus not, and how does things like AI change the game and allow us all to access higher IQ, putting us in a position to focus more on those other traits that are going to generate success. Now, a little personal note, I base these YouTube videos off of articles that I write. I post an article every week to bledsoe.life. You can go check them out. I've got you can sign up for the newsletter there. And I spend about 6 to 10 hours per article there. And every week I have the deadline. And this particular week, I was a little late on my deadline. A lot of times I'm ahead, but it was really because this topic was a bit challenging for me to write about. And not necessarily because I have a lot of personal stories that I'm telling here, but because I reflected on my life and I noticed how I really admire people that have a lot of this trait called agency. And I pride myself on having a lot of agency. And when I look back on my life, from when I look at where I've had a lot of success, I see a lot of agency. But it also highlighted not just how I lacked agency in the past that generated results that I did not like and would be looked at as failures, but also currently in my life now where I've lacked agency and I'm not experiencing the type of success in certain aspects of my life. And so this was a very confronting article for me to write. And as you're listening and watching this video, I hope that you get as much out of this as I got putting it together. Yeah, apologies. I got a little bit of allergies today, and so I might be a little nasal, but we'll get into the material here. Have you ever met really successful people who are not that intelligent? I certainly have. And I remember as I was growing up and interacting with more people who were successful financially and realizing that they weren't all really that intelligent. A lot of them are, but a lot of them aren't. And I started noticing that intelligence may not have as much to do with being financially successful. And there's something else that's alive there, which can be another thing that was disappointing about it. Is as I was growing up, I had this belief, and our parents and teachers and all this stuff really drill it into you that if you want to be successful, you really need to study and you need to go to college. And there's this thing where the intellect is really put on this pedestal, but it doesn't really turn into that in real life. And so we have people that have low IQs that make a lot of money. We have people who have really high IQs that don't make a lot of money and are not very successful. I watched a podcast a few months ago of an interview of Chris Langham. You can look him up. Chris Langham is, I think, the smartest man alive, an estimated IQ of like 195 to 200, well above where Elon's at. I think he's measured around 140 to 160, something like that. And so you have this guy who has really high intellect, but as you listen to the podcast, the YouTube, it's a couple hours long, you start seeing it's very obvious to me why he's not successful. And that's because he doesn't have this thing called agency. And we're going to get into the details of what exactly agency is and how to develop it, and how you probably already have some traits of agency within yourself and how you can take it even further. If somebody has no agency whatsoever, then developing it further can be a big challenge. But if you're interested in this topic, then you're probably already have a certain level of agency already. So IQ and intellect has definitely played a role in the past and will currently play a role in somebody's success. But now that we have tools like AI, where some have suggested that ChatGPT has an IQ of 155. Some people say as high as 180. And we have all these different platforms that are putting out new things all the time. We pretty much have unlimited access to knowledge, and we have access to being rational. We have access to things that think at a high IQ. And so it has less to do about us having high IQ ourselves, but more to do with how we're using it. And the number one trait that I keep hearing about as I listen to podcasts and I go listen to the experts and I hear people talk about what's actually setting people apart, and the word agency keeps coming up. And I've had a general understanding of what agency was. I'd heard the word, I understood it in general terms, but I never sat down and really studied it until last week. And so there's a simple definition of high agency. And so high agency is the ability to take decisive action and create results regardless of the circumstances. And somebody who has low agency, they usually wait for the conditions to be perfect before they take action. This is the majority of people. So the majority of the population has low agency. And then there's some people that have high agency. If you go over to the blog, I've got a tweet there that I took from a guy named George Mack. And he's got a visual demonstration there of like optimism equals, he's got the glass is half full versus the half empty. You've got optimists, the glass is half full. The pessimists say the glass is half empty. And high agency is someone grabbing the cup and going and filling it up with water. And once you see that, it's a really powerful demonstration, and quickly you'll get the idea of what that actually means. And like I said, you're probably already you already have some agency. The fact that you're listening to this, you're looking for this type of information. And so what I've done is I've put agency on a spectrum. So there's 3 levels of agency. And then level 1 is going to be baseline agency. These are people who make decent, okay employees. And so we then have our level 2, which is struggling entrepreneurs. So these are people who have an elevated agency. There's enough agency there to say, hey, I can go build my own business. I'm going to take responsibility for my own financial success. And I'm following the desires and using my will to create something in the world. And then there's level 3, which is the successful entrepreneurs. These are people with high agency. So there's 4 different areas if we go out online and we start looking at the different opinions of psychological research and psychologists and all this stuff, you're going to end up with 20 different traits that you could be looking at. But I've gotten it down to 4 different main traits with the help of Grok 3, of course, one of my favorite platforms to use for research. And so the 4 different areas that contribute to high agency is self-efficacy or confidence, locus of control. That means that you understand that you're in charge of your own life, proactiveness, and resilience. And so those are the 4 areas. I'm going to tell you a quick story. I'm going to read this. This is a guy who was one of my clients. His name is Gabe West. And in early 2020, we all were hit with a surprise pandemic, right? And a lot of things shut down and a lot of people's businesses were disrupted. And there's a story about Gabe, and this story begins before I met him. And so in early 2020, he hit a major turning point. Just 6 months after opening his gym on the east side of Washington State, the pandemic shut everything down. While scrambling to pivot online, Gabe got devastating news, a call from his mom letting him know she had stage 4 cancer. Without hesitation, he closed his gym and moved back to his hometown to support his family. He adapted quickly, picking up tile and flooring jobs before eventually landing on tugboats. That's a pretty wild job. He told me a little bit about it. Now, his life became a whirlwind of unpredictable shifts. Working on the tugboats involved 6 days on, 3 days off, with a constant on-call work dictated by the tides. So he'd often get calls at all hours of the night, maybe 2 a.m., And amid the chaos, Gabe still found moments to grab kettlebells, train hard, and shoot quick, raw videos between shifts. He was still pursuing his dreams. Seeing his friends succeed online sparked a new idea, and Gabe dove headfirst into creating mobility-related fitness content on TikTok. Within weeks, he exploded to over 120,000 followers. Yet once he did, he realized that the mobility niche wasn't his true passion. So Gabe boldly walked away, shut down the account, and started again from scratch on Instagram. He challenged himself to 30 days of reels, and his relentless commitment paid off. 3 reels went viral at once, generating a situation that he was able to harness and create $10,000 in just a single month. Now, Gabe's story embodies true high agency, taking decisive, messy action, rapidly adapting, and persevering despite massive setbacks. He didn't inherit his success. He forged it one bold step at a time. And so this is really interesting because before I did not start working with him until after he had achieved this. He had gone out, he had put his mind to it, and he started executing. And then I got a call and we started working together to maximize the situation that he had found himself in. Now, there are those who live in the reality created by others, and then there are those who create their own reality inside the mind of high agency entrepreneurs. There are those who live in the reality created by others, and then there are those who create their own reality. The people surrounding Steve Jobs said he had something called the reality distortion field. And I remember reading his biography, and they were talking about that. And a lot of people also said that Steve was an asshole. And he would come in and they would tell him, hey, we can't do this. There's a limitation here. There was even a belief that there was physical limitations. But Steve Jobs was able to walk in the room, and he had this, what people called the reality distortion field, and everyone's stories and beliefs about what was possible, he challenged. And so they saw problems, he saw opportunities. And when you read his biography, you'll find that it's likely a mixture of how he was raised, and then he also intentionally developed his own agency over time. And that created a situation where he was able to create a business that was one of the most successful businesses of all time. And it changed the lives of everybody on the planet. Everybody's interacted, maybe unless you're deep in China somewhere, you've interacted with Apple products in some way, or at least if you don't own any, you've been exposed to them, and they actually caused other companies have to step up their game. And Steve Jobs, definitely another person that had a lot of agency. So we're going to dig into one of the traits that contribute, and that is locus of control. And that is someone that has ownership and not victimhood. And if we want to talk about ownership, then I need to dig into some victimhood first. And even though most people were looking at Steve Jobs and saying that he had a reality distortion field, the fact of the matter is we all have our own reality distortion field. His just happened to be a high agency distortion field. Most people have a low agency. And so the reality that the mainstream person lives in and everyone agrees on and says, hey, this is just reality, is not really true. They just happen to share the same reality distortion field. And that distortion field is called victim mentality. Now, it doesn't sound very nice, does it? No one wants to admit that they have victim mentality, but I have to admit I have victim mentality thoughts at times. I slide into that. My job is not necessarily to say, oh, I never have victim mentality at all. It is more to do with trying to and minimizing the amount of victim mentality that I have running in my system and developing a greater sense of awareness so that I can spot it. And once you start learning about what victim mentality is, which we're going to right now, you'll it'll be a lot easier to see in other people, which is great. You can see it in other people, but a lot of times we see it in other people. That way we can then see it in ourselves. And if you're in the spiritual community, or you have heard about the spiritual community, which I have a lot of interactions with, there's a lot of people have traded out the mainstream narrative for a spiritual community narrative, but it's still a victim mentality. They just traded some names out and all that kind of stuff. And most people have not advanced past this. And I bring that up because I think that a lot of times people that get into a lot of these different spiritual practices or little cult groups think they've gone beyond where they actually have. And so you can spot victim mentality because you know what you're going to see? It's going to be complaint. Anytime there's complaint about other people, complaint about circumstances, that is a surefire way to spot victim mentality. And so you don't necessarily have to be complaining about what's happening to you. You can be complaining about what's going on for other people. And you don't have to be placing yourself as the victim in order to participate in the illusion. You just have to believe that there are victims that are present and that victims exist in the first place. And now you may say, I can point out like there's a real life, real situation where there's victims and villains and all this kind of stuff. And I invite you to investigate your own consciousness in that place and say, is there really victims and villains, or are these people that are just in agreement with something? A lot of times I will hear stories of that guy's being a real jerk to his wife or vice versa. And I don't know why she stays with him. And every time I hear that, I go, it's because they're perfect for each other. They're in agreement about it in some way. They may not be happy, but they're in agreement, and that's why they're together. And so that person who may be sitting in the victim seat or the villain seat is going to be playing that out no matter what relationship they're in. And if they get into a relationship where the other person is not in agreement with that, that relationship's not going to exist. It's not going to start, or it's not going to continue on. And we have this thing, which you can go check out on the blog. I've got a graphic of it, the drama triangle. The drama triangle is you have the hero in one point, you have a villain at another point, and you have a victim in another point. And the thing about the drama triangle is that the human mind loves to position itself in the drama triangle in some way. It either, in all relationships, there's some type of victim, hero, or villain that's present. And the heroes, we'll talk about the victims first. The victim is at the effect of the things that might be, the thoughts that the victim may be having or may be saying are, I don't have enough time. There's nothing I can do. It's too hard. I have to. That's the language of a victim. And then you have the heroes. And the heroes are the people who are really like, they're the rescuers. Oh, poor you. I can help you. It'll be okay. Let me take over. And then the villains will be blame self or others. It's my fault. You're wrong. Who's to blame? They won't let us. They're pointing out and saying someone else is a villain and I'm being victimized by that villain. You see this really play out in one of the most frustrating groups for me to witness is political activists. And I'm not going to point at the specific activists that I find most frustrating because it may not align with you, and it may be a lot easier for you to go, oh yeah, I know some political activists that they do this. And a lot of people in the political activist realm, what they love to do is place themselves as the heroes. Oh, there's this group. And then they blame someone else for the poor circumstances of some group, which are the victims. They go, okay, I'm the hero. Those guys are the bad guys. So if you're like a Democrat, you're saying these poor people are being mistreated by the Republicans, or the Republicans will do the same thing with the Democrats, and that they're creating this drama triangle. And that actually doesn't help anybody. By pointing fingers at someone who is a villain and pointing out that there are victims holds the illusion of the drama triangle in place for everybody. And so if you perceive that there is a victim in society, or a group of people that are victims in society in some way, one of the worst things you could do is point out the fact that they're a victim, or the fact they're not really victims. You may point out that there are these villains that are causing these problems for this group. You'll see it because anytime a group starts being segregated out by identity, and there's a story about how they're being marginalized and they need some type of special attention, then that just shows that the spell of the drama triangle illusion is really strong. And once you understand this concept and you go out in the world, you're going to notice that there's a lot of bullshit out there. And I find it to be really disgusting. And I find it to be disgusting because there are a lot of people who are aware of this who do leverage it for their own benefit. But for the most part, people are unconscious to this. They just think that this is how the world is. But if you've been participating in the drama triangle unconsciously in any way, then you've been a pawn of politicians. So wake up. In business, struggling entrepreneurs will blame the market, algorithms, politicians, customers, the competition, or the idea of not having enough hours in the day. So if you find yourself in there, then, okay, victim mentality has slipped in a little bit. It's really sneaky. One of the reasons it's sneaky is because it's so common. It's just normal. So one thing that I do is I watch my language. I watch the internal dialogue. I watch the external dialogue. The thoughts that are just running in my head that I don't say outside. The thoughts that I let come out of my mouth to other people. And thankfully, I have a wife who will point it out to me when I do it, and vice versa. We're there to hold each other accountable. And one of the really common ones is, do you ever catch yourself wishing there was more time? If you catch yourself doing that, you've already put yourself in a victim mentality, and there's an opportunity to get out of it, which we're getting into. And so I want you to transcend the drama triangle by taking ownership, and 100% ownership. And if you've hung out around a lot of successful entrepreneurs like I have, you'll find that they've undergone some type of transformation. They participated in retreats or having experiences with psychedelics that allow them to break through the illusion momentarily to see the patterns they've been living in that have created the results of their life up until this point. And I say momentarily because I've been to so many different retreats, and I have so much clarity in that space. And then I come home and I get into some old patterns and routines of the day. And then there's a forgetting. And then you go to another retreat and there's a remembering. And so that's really where the work is at, is go to one of these transformational experiences. It could be Tony Robbins. It could be an ayahuasca retreat. It could be anything in the middle. And you come home and then the routine kicks back in and the illusion starts taking its place. So I want to make a little side note here about psychedelics because it can be quite a touchy subject. And I've been participating in psychedelic medicine since 2013 intentionally. So it's been about 12 years. And so one of the trends that I've seen happen is that a lot of people position psychedelics as the whole solution when it's just a tool to open the window. And many people get lost in the new illusion that happens by going to retreats and then coming home and failing to make a new choice. They see a new possibility, but they fail to make the new choice when they get home. And that new choice has to be made repeatedly. And it's not part of your pattern. So to break out of that pattern requires you to really stay awake. And this is why a lot of times in the psychedelic community, because this external substance is doing it for you in the moment, and you don't have that when you leave, it can make it even more challenging. So I'm a big fan of balancing out anytime I'm doing any type of psychedelic related retreat. I am going and doing another retreat that there's no psychedelics involved at all. And they're equally beneficial in their own ways, but by doing retreats and transformational work that is not psychedelic related has allowed me to integrate in my daily life a lot better. So if you've been in this cycle of a lot of psychedelics, but not a lot of other type of transformational work, I encourage you to go do that for a little while. So people get stuck in these dopamine hits, and I call it insight without action. They get addicted to having the insight. You can see them online. I know plenty of people in this category. It seems like every 1, 2, 3 months they post something. They're like, I just had this huge revelation and yada, yada, yada. And then you talk to them a few months later and their life has gone back to whatever mess it was in before. And the gaining the insight causes a dopamine hit, and that in itself can be addictive in nature. And so people are just going after insights, but they're not going after new choice, because new choice is where the difference is actually made. That's how the transformation actually occurs. And for people who have already demonstrated a lot of discipline and will in their life, a lot of times the introduction of psychedelics can be really beneficial. But for the people who may have been struggling through their life and never had a lot of discipline, it can be something that can cause them to slide back. Just something I want to point out here. So once the veil has been lifted, the real work is in making the new choice and consistently staying in that new choice for much more time afterwards. And so a lot of us are seeking freedom. We want to have freedom over our own time. We want to have freedom over the types of things we do. We want to have freedom about where we live. And we talk about freedom a lot, but the true freedom, the sense of freedom that we're really going for, is to become free to our patterns that were generated from the past. And so that happens through a practice of being present and awake. Now, our biology, it fights that, because it is really, our nervous system likes us to be in routine, likes us to be in pattern, because it's allowed us to survive up until this point. And any biological system is trying to conserve energy. So the subconscious mind and the patterning from the past is really programmed to keep you alive. And the ego will say, this has worked up until this point. Why do we need to change it? But most of the time, those patterns that helped us survive at a young age are the same ones that keep us trapped or keep us from going to the places we really want to go. And so working at your level of consciousness is really what's necessary to have a transformative experience that really sticks. And having insight is not high agency. Making a new choice is high agency. And that's taking 100% responsibility for our current life and continuing to hold ourselves accountable to the results that we're getting as we move forward. So we remove any blame of parents, school, politicians, the market, or customers. And we also stay away and don't have blame for ourselves. We just simply witness what is, and we do it with love. And that is what makes it easier to make our new choice and create the new reality. So responsibility is not shame, guilt, or blame. It's really a gift we give ourselves. And when you can see it as such, then freedom is actually available. And as you go through this work, and you're even just watching this YouTube video might be transformational in some way, because you're learning new information, you're going to gain some insights. You'll make some changes based off of just watching this. Be careful of being too judgmental of others and trying to call them out and call them forward, because that is a skill in itself. Is if you've truly done the own work in yourself, when you call people forward, they'll step into it. If you haven't, you'll scare them away. The next trait or category of traits that contribute to agency is self-efficacy and confidence. And so I never really thought about these terms as any different, but after some research, I see them as dramatically different, and having a distinction between the two is really helpful. And so both terms are related to having belief in oneself. But self-efficacy doesn't transcend into self-confidence if you stay trapped in a pattern of struggle, avoiding new opportunities to learn. You can think of self-efficacy as the belief in oneself to complete a task or to perform well in specific situations. So an increase is mostly attributed to become more competent at something through practice and experience. And with greater self-efficacy, we'll get a greater sense of agency over very specific areas of our life or become an expert at a specific thing. But you can, even though you have that self-efficacy in that very specific area, it doesn't necessarily generalize that self-belief pattern into all areas of your life, which is necessary if you want to be an entrepreneur. And so this is evident because if you ever feel as though you're confident in some things, but you lack confidence somewhere else, or you become shy and you're really confident in some situations or shy in others, that just means that the self-confidence has not developed yet. You may have a lot of self-efficacy, but you haven't developed a lot of self-confidence. And so self-confidence is a much broader sense of belief in oneself. And this is built up over time by becoming competent at a broad number of tasks and situations. So it's really, the way I see it is the self-efficacy, you experience self-efficacy in this situation. And the broader you can get, what you'll develop is more self-confidence. People who really stay in a narrow field will likely fail to create self-confidence in general. And so if this is why CEOs of companies tend to be intelligent generalists, because if you stay focused in one area for so long, you won't develop the confidence. But take a child who's excelled in sports, music, mathematics, and some type of social activities. They're going to develop confidence because they start to realize and understand that they can learn anything. And that confidence comes from, I've solved problems in this scenario, in that scenario, in this scenario. And when you start solving problems in a multitude of scenarios, you start believing, oh, I have the ability to solve problems. I have the ability to learn a lot of different things. And so when you start having that confidence, learning new things actually becomes a lot faster. And so a lot of the clients that come to me, I work with a lot of people one-on-one, and most of my one-on-one clients come to me because they've really excelled as a specialist somewhere. They've seen a certain level of success, but when it comes to running a business, which requires you to be a generalist, they lack the confidence. And part of it is because there's also competence that's built in there. And so what I'm doing is I'm helping them shift into a CEO mindset. And so they've harnessed some type of skill and it's time to branch out new things. And they need someone like myself, or they hire a coach or a consultant that's able to help them throttle their nervous system as they learn new things. So they may not have that self-confidence, but within a year or two of working together, that self-confidence skyrockets because we're able to learn new skills and become competent at them over time. And then they start recognizing, oh, wow, I can do a lot of different things. And so now they'll sign up for things or start learning about something or start teaching something new. And they have a lot of confidence. And that was built because of being a generalist and practicing to be a generalist. So if you've been a specialist and you haven't gotten out of that window yet and really expanded, then one of the practices you can do is start learning something that's very different than what you learned before. Now, it may be challenging in the beginning and it can take years to build that confidence, but the best time to start is right now. The third trait we're going to discuss in relation to agency is being proactive. So if you're running a business and had a star employee, or you work for another business and you're a star employee, or people who really excel, it's because those people proactively create solutions. We've all heard, oh, wow, be proactive. And what that means is they're able to work in the background. They spot problems and then they find a solution for it and start working the solution without really needing advice from the superiors, or they need minimal input and they're able to work it in the background. They just make it happen. If you're an owner of a business and you have these people, it is amazing. But our job as entrepreneurs is to solve problems. And your business usually, it should solve a specific problem. And if you started a business, whether you knew it or not, you were making the choice to solve a problem for a group of people, your customers, clients, whatever it is. So when I first opened my first CrossFit gym, my first business, I was solving the problem. The problem that I saw was that other gyms didn't offer the type of fitness I believed was superior at the time. I wanted people to have access to CrossFit, so I opened the first one in my town. Now, when I started my first podcast and YouTube channel 5 years later, I saw the problem that athletes, coaches, and gym owners didn't have enough of the right information to train properly. So I was looking for it. I go, oh, no one solved this yet. I guess I'll do it. And then years later, I started a marketing agency for CrossFit gym owners, and I solved the problem that they didn't know how to market effectively. And so we created a service that marketed for them. So if you have a business, your job is to solve the problem for your customers. And inside of your business, your job is to reduce the bottlenecks, quote unquote, problems to better serve your clients and scale your services to as many clients and customers as possible. By putting yourself out in the marketplace in the first place, whether you did it consciously or not, I didn't do it consciously the first time, you've already proven a level of proactivity that most people shy away from. Most people aren't proactive enough to say, I see a problem to solve. I'm going to do it with a business. I'm going to start this thing. And so if you've already started a business, you're already well ahead of the curve. And the degree of success you're going to have is how proactive you are in solving your own bottlenecks. And so that's one of the things that I see in businesses. My job is to predict the bottlenecks that are coming. If I currently am experiencing, there's always a bottleneck. There's always something that's slowing it down. That's something that's limiting its growth. So I'm always looking for what's the next thing that's limiting the growth of the business. And then we solve for that and we solve for that. And I've run enough businesses at this point to where I can start predicting, once we solve this, I know we're going to have to solve that. And so it's a lot easier to spot. And a guy like Elon Musk, he's moving at breakneck speeds here. He has teams of several companies that are made up of high agency individuals, and he only gets called in for the problems that they cannot solve. So he is the most high agency person in those businesses. He sets the vision, puts people in place that are really good at problem solving, and he only gets involved when high agency people can't do it. And then he walks in. Now he's the most high agency person. He solves it. And so because he's stacked his teams with high agency people, it makes it possible for him to run 6, 7 companies and also reduce the garbage in the government and solve the bottlenecks that are existing there. All right. So the last trait we're looking at in regard to agency is resilience. And the thing is, we all have setbacks from time to time, and how we handle it is dictated by the level of resilience we've developed. A lot of times we like to think we'll perform well under pressure, but we don't really have practice performing under pressure. And it's really good to put ourselves. I was really fortunate when I was younger that I was put in a lot of tough situations. I put myself in a lot of tough situations that built up my resilience. Now, that doesn't mean, this is one of those topics where when I said at the beginning of this recording that there were things that challenged me. And I actually, when I was younger, I had a high level of resilience. I definitely had some setbacks. There was definitely some negative self-talk that happened. And I've had some things that happened the last several years that I've experienced setbacks. And the level of resiliency that I practiced was a bit embarrassing, to be honest. And that's something that I've gotten to look at as I was writing this article. Oh, wow. I have been running around this assumption I've had high agency, but in the face of some of these setbacks and being put into new situations and new relationships and so on and so forth has challenged my resiliency in a lot of ways. And I'm really grateful because the level of resiliency I have now at the age of 43 is much, much greater. And so the stakes tend to get higher the older you get. So if you're in your 20s, you may feel as though the stakes are high, but they're not yet. And I'm sure that people who are in their 60s, they're looking at me and going, oh, you're just a baby. You can still make mistakes, yada, yada, yada. Keep that in mind. Now, remember Gabe? I told the story earlier in the video. He experienced several setbacks in different areas of his life. He was placed in less than ideal circumstances, but he had the resilience to keep moving forward. And I bet if you talk to him, He didn't feel resilient at the time, but he is. And when I look back over my entrepreneurial career, I see that I've had almost as many losses as I've had gains. If I go year by year, I'm like, that year sucked, that year sucked, that year sucked. Whoa, that year was awesome. That year was awesome. It's good to know that as well. I can look back and go, 9 of the 18 years, or maybe 6, 7, 8 of the 19 years or 18 years of being in business were actually pretty tough. It's really common. So if you're experiencing a tough year, the first 3 years of my first business was just one ass kicking after another. And getting through that first 3-year period allowed me to become much more confident in my ability to succeed in the face of a lot of adversity. And so when things become tough for me now, I didn't do this when I was younger, but I definitely I've gotten a lot better about it now, is when things go south, when things don't go as planned, I become hyper vigilant of my self-talk. I'm listening to the thoughts that are running through my head. I listen to what I'm saying to my wife, and I sort through them. And many of those thoughts are not pretty. I've had suicidal ideation over my lifetime. And that just means that I had thoughts that I could end it here. I would have images of what it would be like to kill myself. And I had those thoughts, and then I kept moving, and I told myself, and I tell myself now, is I am not going to believe those thoughts. If you believe those thoughts as the solution over time, your view will get smaller and smaller, and you'll get tunnel vision, and it'll start looking like it's the only option. So when those thoughts come in, I get to choose. I choose not to believe those thoughts, and I get to choose to generate new thoughts that are optimistic. There are thoughts of, one of the things I tell myself frequently is zoom out over space, zoom out over time, get a real view of what I'm actually dealing with right now. And I really take a breath. I notice if I'm holding my breath, then the possibility of tunnel vision starts coming on stronger. So I take a breath and I zoom out. And I start asking myself questions to focus on solutions instead of the problem. And I get to remind myself that I'm the creator of my reality. Now, one of the big benefits that I've gained over the years is I'm surrounded by people who do the same. If you're not surrounded by people who do the same, that'll be a bigger challenge. But my best friends, I call them up and they're like, zoom out, take a breath. Okay, cool, we're good. And I do that with them as well. And a lot of the work here is becoming present with my emotions, but I don't let them dictate my life. And so I may have dark thoughts and emotions that I want to push away, but what I do is embrace them and recognize that they are not my master, and I have the authority over my thoughts and feelings. And by being able to experience the emotions, but them not dictating my life, that's resilience. That's having authority. Most people were trained to just push their emotions away and push things away, but that just has them come back even stronger later on. And so true resilience, which is not taught in the military, by the way, is to really engage what's going on emotionally, but not allowing it to control you as though like a child is dictated by their emotions. So agency is yours. You already have it. You've developed in it in some way, and you get to continue to develop it. Whereas something like IQ is something that's generally set from childhood, and you're not going to make a big jump in IQ over time. But agency is every one of those traits is something that can be trained. And wherever you're starting, that's where you're starting. Take ownership of that place. And so you may look at other people and go, it's not fair. Their parents raised them in a way that gave them high agency, or that person was given parents that had high agency and they inherited it, and this person didn't. My parents sucked, and yeah, doesn't matter. No matter where you're at right now, it is your responsibility. So you are the one to choose to develop it or not. And like I said, especially if you've made it to this point in the video, you probably have higher agency than the average person, which means that you already have momentum. And so I encourage you to surround yourself with people who also have it. And that's one of the reasons I started my community over at the 1 Hour Business. A lot of people who are consciously developing their agency there. Yeah. And so my request to you is go over to bledsoe.life, get on the newsletter, subscribe to this channel, give it a share it with your friends. See you next time.